I just want to make sure that you understand that this is not about the session. This is just an accessor. So now I want to say a name. So notice what I've done here. I'm updating airplanes 1, and I'm telling it that I want it to set the property friendly to the value sort of. If I'm going to execute this now, and then go and look at this guy, you can see that we have just added a friendly property. We didn't have to do anything, it just happened for us. This is part of RavenDB, the nature of RavenDB of it being totally schemaless. Let's see. So Ben is asking, if the ID is read random, do you recommend using indexes to find objects? This is actually an interesting question. Let me just get back to the session. So here's the issue. The document ID serves one single purpose. It serves to actually be an opaque representation of the document that is unique. So from the point of view of RavenDB, you can use GUID, you can use whatever you want, but in order to be human readable, we use the type name slash the plural type name slash the actual some numeric value, because this is very readable for humans. But in most cases, you don't want the ID doesn't mean much. In many cases, you actually do have the ID, but in many other cases, you actually want to be able to query by, let's say, wingspan that is greater than 1. Okay, so as you can see here, now I'm actually using link in order to generate this query. You know what, let's do it in the full link syntax. Okay, so as you can see, we also have very nice link support. And now you can see what we have done. We have issued a query. We got 3 results back. And this is very interesting because if you know anything about a document database, you know that this is an extremely non-trivial feature. And the reason that this is a non-trivial feature is that it allows us to basically issue any sort of queries against the database and have the database figure out for itself. If you're using something like CouchDB, this would be just not possible to do because CouchDB forces you to define a view. We call it an index, they call it a view before every query. If you're using something like MongoDB, this would be possible, but this would be very costly. But if we go into RavenDB now and look at the indexes that we have, you can see that we have defined a temporary new index called by wingspan, and you can see that we sort that based on the wingspan here. And the basic idea is that we issue the query to RavenDB. RavenDB figure out that we want to query airplanes by wingspan. This is probably not something that you just want to do once, so it created an index for you. Next time that you query by wingspan, the query optimizer will already recognize that index exists and use that. And if you query over wingspan enough, this will become a permanent index. If you just made a few queries against that index, eventually it will be dropped automatically, and all of the resources will be reclaimed. Now we have 6 more minutes for this webcast because apparently we are limited by time. I wonder if there is some way I can change that. I don't think so. So I'm going to just try to answer some questions very rapidly. Can you just raise your hands if you think that this format is workable and good? Anyone? So I think that we have a fairly positive response. And what this means is that we're probably going to have more of those. So we have a bunch of other stuff. We actually haven't even gotten to anything yet. But I think because, look, we have a whole bunch of more features. So I'm just going to cover multi-map reduce is the ability to have multiple map functions that all are reduced by a single reduce function. This is useful if you want to implement joins in a document database. I want to talk about profiling support because this is another cool feature that I don't think enough people know. If you go to my blog and look at the upper left corner, oh, there it is, you can see that we actually have enabled online in production a profiler for RavenDB. And here you can see all of the requests that have been required to generate the main page. And you can even drill down into the request, see what was the actual query, the result, everything. This is very useful for a whole bunch of reasons. A, to actually see what's going on, and later on we can actually use that to optimize what we're doing. Other things. So we have aggressive caching and HTTP caching. We have drastically increased the performance of our indexes. We support laser requests. The laser requests are very similar to the future features in Hibernate. We support facets, and I will probably have a webcast just about that later on. Some better plans. We are having documentation effort that is. Itamar, do you want to talk about the documentation?
There is not much to talk about yet. We have some surprises. There is a new website coming. We just finished the design. We were working on it. And the documentation is coming along nicely. We will have, I hope tonight or maybe tomorrow, we will have a beta version of the documents for you to review. And that's about it, I think, for now. We will talk about it later.
Okay, wonderful. We have plans for doing things like auto sharding. We have a new site, which is absolutely amazing. RavenDB is a second generation document database. As I said, it's been around for only 2.5 years. And this is a very significant difference from the other document databases that are out there, because we've been able to actually sit down and look at what they're doing and then say, I know what works and I know how it works. And I know how to, and I know what doesn't work, or the things that they have done to support a certain set of operation or certain aspect of how they want or how they envision their database to run, but that doesn't really match what the average .NET developer would expect. And things that we have said, you know what, yes, this doesn't work for scale, but if you're running on just 1 or 2 machines, this is a perfectly fine feature to use, and this is a very convenient feature to use. So let's add that. So that's something that we pay a whole lot of attention to make sure that the API is easy to use, that the way that we work is very efficient and very nice to use, stuff like that. Okay, so just remember this, and we've done the demos, and according to this, we have another minute and 40 seconds before we go, so I'm going to try to answer as many questions as possible, and if I cannot, I will just post about them to the blog afterward. So Anas is asked, are patch requests transactional? Yes. Thomas asked, never mind, Stacy, and that property will exist on the deserialized model? No. So Stacy is probably talking about the this property that, sorry, about this property that we've just added, the friendly property? And the answer is no, it will not be there because there is no property on the entity to match this. And Oliver, no, I shouldn't have called to list. Thomas, how to handle GUID's ID I'm getting from events when RavenDB want my IDs to be human-readable, meaningful integers. Thomas, they don't have to be that way. RavenDB does not enforce human-readable IDs. It's just a strong recommendation, but you can absolutely use GUIDs as your keys. Do the properties have to have public setters? No. Facet support mark is in there. I have 10 more seconds, so I cannot discuss that. We'll do another webcast specifically about that. 5, 4, I think we're done now. Let's see what happens in 1 second. And it appears that we can still go on. I don't know what this means. Can you raise your hand if we are still on? Okay, so there is no time limit. I'm going to continue. If you feel that this has been too much, feel free to leave. Everything is going to be recorded, but I'm going to stay here until we run out of questions. So let me see what other questions do we have. So I'm just going over this. So okay, so Nick asks, the profiler is great, but would be nice if we could get it to open in another window. How to use when you have jQuery dialog in the application. And Nick, the answer to that is that I have absolute confidence in my ability to write databases. I have zero confidence in my ability to write UI. On the other hand, RavenDB is an open source project, and I would strongly encourage you to actually just send us a pull request. It's fairly easy to do, and we usually just give you that. I mean, just send me a pull request. We'll review your code, assume that it's up to our standard. We'll include it in the project, and you can have your own features in RavenDB. Ooh, a lot more questions coming up. Is there a book or PDF coming out? I realize that things are developing quite fast, but having a single source of information is helpful. So there is actually a book about RavenDB that we are working on. tinyurl.com/raven-book, if I remember correctly. And that will take you to this URL. This is the RavenDB book. We call it RavenDB Mythology. And we are working on that. This is part of the documentation effort that Itamar was talking about earlier. We are trying to centralize all of the documentation, so on the website or as a PDF, as a physical book that you can order online or just, read on Kindle or whatever, you're able to get it and read it. So that is about that. And we're very excited about the new documentation. And Daniel, when will it be finished? So the secret answer is that you can go and check it right now, if you like to read the actual raw data. Itamar hopefully will have the beta website for the documentation by tomorrow. And again, we will post about that so you can actually look at and see how this works. You can go to this URL, github/ravendb/docs, and look at our current documents as we work on them. Or you can wait a day or two and we'll have that in a format that is actually much more visible to work with. Let's see. This webinar is recorded, and assuming that nothing bad happens, we will make it available later on. So Daniel asks, can I have high-low ID generated in nested collection items? The answer is yes, but it doesn't really make a lot of sense. And I don't want to get into that. Ping us on the mailing list and we'll discuss all of that later on.